Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Jaya Radha Gopinatha Radha Gopinatha Shri Radha Radha Gopinatha Radha Gopinatha Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Cham Vishnupat Param Sabaraj Kacharya Stottara Shattasta Vaingraya Sabhacharan Bhaktivedanta Samashva Prabhupada Ke Jai Grantarachima Bhagavatam Ke Jai Anantakoti Vaishnavarinda Ke Jai Nitya Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bhava Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. Today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 1. Chapter title Questions by Vidura. Text 3 and 4. Rajavaja Kutra Kshatur Bhagavata Kutra Kshatur Bhagavata Maitrayena Sasangamaha Maitrayena Sasangamaha Kadava Sahasamvada Kadava Sahasamvada Etat Varnayanaha Prabhu Etat Varnayanaha Prabhu Rajavaja Kutra Kshatur Bhagavata Maitrayena Sasangamaha Kadava Sahasamvada Etat Varnayana Prabhu Rajavaja Kutra Kshatur Bhagavata Maitrayena Sasangamaha Kadava Sahasamvada Etat Varnayana Prabhu Raja Uvaja. The king said, Kutra, wherein, Kshatuhu, with Vidura, Bhagavata, and with his grace, Maitrayena, with Maitreya, Asa, there was, Sangamaha, meeting, Kada, when, Va, also, Saha, with, Sambhada, discussion, Etat, this, Varnaya, describe, Naha, unto me, Prabhu, O my Lord. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Abhayacharan, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ke Jai. Translation. The king asked Shukadeva Goswami, Where and when did a meeting and discussion take place between Saint Vidura and his great Grace Maitreya Muni? Kindly oblige, my lord, and describe this to us. Purport. Exactly as Shonaka Rishi inquired of Sutta Goswami, and Sutta Goswami replied, so Srila Shukadeva Goswami replied to King Parikshit's inquiries. The king was very anxious to understand the meaningful discussion that took place between the two great souls. Text 4. Nahyalpa todayastasya vidurasya malatmanaha tasmin variyasi prashnaha sadhuvado paprimritaha. Translation. Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to His Grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful, on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. Purport. Questions and answers among different classes of men have different value. Inquiries by mercantile men in a business exchange cannot be expected to be highly purposeful in spiritual values. Questions and answers by different classes of men can be guessed by the caliber of the persons concerned. In Bhagavad Gita, the discussion was between Lord Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the Supreme Person and the Supreme Devotee, respectively. The Lord admitted Arjuna to be his devotee and friend, Bhagavad Gita 4.3, and therefore any sane man can guess that the discussion was on the topic of the Bhakti Yoga system. Actually, the whole Bhagavad Gita is based on the principle of Bhakti Yoga. There is a difference between karma and karma yoga. Karma is regulated action for the enjoyment of the fruit by the performer, but karma yoga is action performed by the devotee for the satisfaction of the Lord. Karma yoga is based on bhakti or pleasing the Lord, whereas karma is based on pleasing the senses of the performer himself. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, one is advised to approach a bona fide spiritual master when one is actually inclined to question from an elevated level of spiritual understanding. A common man who has no interest in spiritual values has no need to approach a spiritual master just as a matter of following fashion. As a student, Maharaj Parikshit was serious about learning the science of God, and Shukadeva Goswami was a bona fide spiritual master in the transcendental science. Both of them knew that the topics discussed by Vidura and Rishi Maitreya were elevated, and thus Maharaj Parikshit was very interested in learning from the bona fide spiritual master. Om Jnanatimirandasya Grananchana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Gramayam Dadate Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttaparikamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrachatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sachevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Varan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gauranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamame Hare Priya Ancha Kalpataruvashta Kripa Sindhube Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So, finally, yesterday we started the third canto called The Status Quo. After finishing the 10th canto, Bhagavatam Answer to All Questions of the second chapter. And so still, even though we heard Bhagavatam being the answer to all questions, again, now we continue with more questions. Now, chapter 1, third canto, questions by Vidura. And so, but it starts with, like, on the higher level, or like outzoomed, how do you say, about the conversation between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, which is the main conversation, as we know, in constituting Srimad Bhagavatam. And then in the last verses also about Oh, sorry. Actually, it was end of second canto. How it started off by, because actually there it said that Shukadeva Goswami himself told to Parikshit Maharaj that now I'll tell you about the Padma Kalpa, because he, and so, but then he doesn't actually continue on that, and because, or rather Bhagavatam doesn't continue there at that point, because Prabhupada explained in the purport that Shonaka Rishi was so eager to hear more about, he was so curious what happened further with Vidura and Maitreya Rishi, because he had heard before that Vidura, like even in first canto actually we hear like how Vidura delivers his elder brother Dhritarashtra by speaking very strongly to him after coming back after the pilgrimage, coming back just to deliver his brother Dhritarashtra from, even though he was, in such a, he was so old, his body so decayed, or like, how do you say, like so aged that he was blind from birth, but then so his existence was just depending there on being maintained by the very ones he was so envious of, the Pandavas, and tried plotting against them throughout their life, and so on. But so Vidura out of compassion came back that time and delivered him. But Maharaj Parikshit heard about. Oh, sorry, that actually first canto is not that's not Parikshit Maharaj heard that. We know he starts hearing only in the second canto. So that's, but Sutta Goswami heard. So Shonaka Rishi, or Sutta Goswami spoke and Shonaka Rishi heard. And so Shonaka Rishi was eager then to hear more about why he was able to give up his royal position, even though we know he was born of a Shudra mother, so he was not on a throne, but still he was living there in the palace where like he would have had all opulences that he would want to wish for, and like that, and his loving relatives like the Pandavas, and he gave that up, and so Shonaka Rishi wanted to understand more about it, why, and then how, what was spoken between those two great souls, Maitreya Rishi and Vidura, as we hear then in today's verses. And so, today 3 and 4. So he asked, or rather, then how does Bhagavatam continue? It goes that Sutta Goswami says, yes, even Parikshit Maharaj asked the same thing from Shukadeva Goswami, and so we hear now Parikshit Maharaj speaking to Shukadeva Goswami today's 2 verses, text 3 and 4. And he describes why, particularly why does he ask about it? Because he, in text 4, then he says to Shukadeva Goswami that Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to his grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful, on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. So, because the point is, devotees, and we know, especially in the position of Maharaj Parikshit, he was there, sitting, simply listening, fully absorbed in listening Krishna Katha from Shukadeva Goswami. We know he gave up eating, drinking, everything, knew he will die after 7 days, and so he was fully dedicated to just hearing the glories of the Lord and his devotees. And so devotees in general, and particularly there Maharaj Parikshit, he didn't want to waste any time hearing anything else other than directly related to the Lord and his devotees. And thus he himself asked about why, and he kind of explains himself here to Shukadeva Goswami that why am I asking like that? Because I know that Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to his grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful, on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. So, in other words, asking about what such great souls conversed automatically means that it must be very beneficial for anyone who hears about it. Because such souls never talk about anything mundane. They only talk about, as actually Prabhupada points out in the Prabhupada, they only talk about Bhakti Yoga or devotional service to the Supreme Lord, because we know that Savaipum Samparo Dharmo Yato Bhaktira Tokshachi, that is the supreme occupation of every living entity, and that is Haitokriya Apratiyata Yayatma Suprasidati. If it is performed unmotivatedly and without interruption, then that is the only way for the self, for the Atma, to really have full satisfaction. And thus, great souls, they only talk about how about the Supreme Lord Himself, which is also a form of devotional service, hearing and Shravan and Kirtanam, we know hearing and speaking about the Lord's glories, and then also in more detail how to perform this devotional service in all the different ways. That's actually what Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita as, that we can understand that is also the highest knowledge, because it was spoken by the Supreme Lord Himself, Sri Krishna, and to Prabhupada says here, to the supreme devotee, Arjuna. He gives the evidence that Krishna himself admitted Arjuna to be his devotee and friend in 4.3. And thus we understand that it's very of the highest value in this conversation, and then Prabhupada explains that because we know Bhagavad Gita talks about many forms of yoga, starting with karma yoga, and so Prabhupada points out that actually real karma yoga means bhakti yoga. Even though, yes, one can distinguish on a more technical level that karma yoga is generally, it simply means to give up your fruits of action, that you understand that if I'm attached to the fruits, if I just perform karma, as Prabhupada points out here the difference, that karma is regulated action for the enjoyment of the fruit by the performer. So generally people perform karma, or actually karma means even that at least they follow the Vedic injunctions of how to perform the work. So in other words, they don't perform sinful work, but they perform pious work. But still the most important thing is the motivation. The motivation of simply engaging in karma is to wanting to enjoy the fruit of the work you do. In other words, you still think that you are the doer and you deserve to enjoy for what you're doing. Whereas in karma yoga, you understand if I do it in that way, then I will suffer because I will accumulate karma. I will get reactions for everything I do, and I will further get entangled. And we know even if you perform pious work, still the nature of material world is that there's always miseries as well, no matter how much piety you accumulate. And so thus a karma yogi performs this action, but understands that I cannot be attached to the fruits, but I offer it to the Lord. And distinction is with Bhakti Yoga, that Bhakti Yoga means that you simply do exactly what the Lord wants. So in Karma Yoga, generally the people then they are attached to still decide like what I want to do, and then simply offer the fruits. Whereas pure Bhakti Yoga, but the principle Prabhupada points out here is already there, that you are not attached to the fruit. So that's the most important principle as a start for yoga, Karma Yoga. But then on a higher level, yes, Bhakti Yoga is still higher, because there you simply do what the Lord likes. You follow your spiritual master and are engaged accordingly simply for the pleasure of the Lord. And and so Prabhupada points that out, that Bhagavad Gita, because we understand it's spoken by the highest personalities, so it can only be about Bhakti Yoga actually, because that is the highest, most important knowledge. And so that people don't confuse that it's not about any other yoga actually. It's only, Krishna explains the different forms of yoga as progression towards Bhakti Yoga, to be able to fully understand Bhakti Yoga and to for different people on different levels to accommodate them, to lead them at least towards Bhakti Yoga. But so many times he points out, do Bhakti Yoga. Man mano bhava mat bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru, and things like that. So, let's brief look. So in text 3, Prabhupada points out that about the conversation, as we said, that's as just as Shaunaka Rishi inquired from Sutta Goswami, so also King Parikshit inquired from Shukadeva Goswami, and that the king was very anxious to understand the meaningful discussion that took place between the two great souls. So throughout the Bhagavatam we see this, that how anxious Maharaj Parikshit was, even though we know by birth, or even before birth, he was in the womb. Already he had the darshan of the Lord, he was saved personally by the Lord, so he was a Nitya Siddha devotee, he was pure devotee. But still, that's the nature of the pure soul, that it always wants to hear about the glories from the Lord, and he's very anxious to do that, as if he would be like here in the last stage of his life, he acts as if he wouldn't know anything, and if he wouldn't hear that from Shukadeva Goswami, he would die and go to some destination which he wouldn't wish for. But he previously, before hearing even, it's clear that he goes back to Godhead. But still, that's one, to set the example to others, and two, it's simply the nature of a pure devotee to be humble and to feel dependent on the Lord. And dependent on the Lord also means to feel dependent on wanting to hear about the Lord, to have the opportunity to hear from pure devotees such as Shukadeva Goswami in his case. And then in the purport of text 4, Prabhupada, he starts off with that interesting point, that questions and answers, like in the first canto. I remember there's a beautiful purport where he explains that the whole world is full of questions and answers. Actually, not only human beings, even animals, they might not speak it out as we can hear it, but actually the mentality is everyone always has some questions, some is looking for something. Like animals, their question might be, where's food, where's shelter? Between human beings on different levels, generally people, they asked about some useless news, what's happening, how can I get money, where can I enjoy sense gratification, or is there any nice events happening? Like always, we are looking for something, and we always inquire, but unfortunately very rarely we inquire into what's really beneficial for us and for others. And so Prabhupada, that's why he explains here that question and answers among different classes of men have different value. Inquiries by mercantile men in a business exchange cannot be expected to be highly purposeful and spiritual values. So even during work, like he explains here, mercantile men in business exchange. So they always have to ask what's the price of this, and all different things. That it's already set from the beginning that the value of that, even if it turns out good as intended by the person inquiring, still the result, it's right from the beginning already preset that the result cannot be actually great, because we know it can only be a small temporary material success. But real success in life is to understand Krishna and to fully engage in pure devotional service. So, and thus Prabhupada so many times he urges the people to not waste this valuable human form of life, and not waste their time in hearing so many not so beneficial things, but simply to hear about Krishna. And like Lord Kapiladiv also very strongly he condemns this mentality of not hearing about Krishna. That's later than in third canto, in chapter 30, he describes the adverse fruitive activities. So in other words, there Lord Kapila describes the life of someone who engages a materialistic person and who doesn't even recognize the authority of the Lord and simply engages in sense gratification just as he likes, so who doesn't follow any rules, regulations, who engages in sinful activities. That's a very heavy chapter. But then 2 chapters later he also briefly describes about sakama karma. So those who perform karma, as we heard here, that following the rules and regulations, but with the intention of sakama, with full of desire, of lust, to enjoy the fruit of what they do. So, and even for them, so what to speak of the ones who perform vikarma, which he describes in chapter 30, but so in chapter 32 it describes even at those, he is very heavy there, explaining to Mother Devahuti how their mentality is wrong, that even performing karma, the mind is always disturbed and all of that. And in one verse he describes about, condemns particularly their mentality of not being ready and eager to hear about the Lord, but that they waste their time hearing all things which are not beneficial. So he says, Daivena Nunam Daivena Vihata Yachachata Katha Satam Hitva Shrinvantya Satkatha Purishamiva Vitbhujaha. So Nunam, it's certainly Nunam Daivena Vihata. Daivena means by the supreme order, or in other words, by the Lord himself, those persons are condemned, Vihata. Why? Because Yachachita Katha Sutam, that the katha about Achyuta, about the Supreme Lord, which is Sudam, which is pure nectar, they don't want to listen to that. Hitva, they give up hearing that, and instead they hear Sudam, Hitva Shrinvanti Asat Katha. Instead they hear Asat Katha, they hear about Asat, about temporary things which have no real value. And then the last line, very heavy. So what does he compare them to? Because, let's go back, he's saying that Krishna Katha, hearing about the Lord, that is nectar, that is Sudam. But not knowing that, because they're so attached to simply perform karma and enjoy the fruits, thinking themselves as enjoyers and controllers, because of that they reject that nectar and instead hear about asadgata, about mundane things. And so because of that mentality he compares that to stool-eating hogs, because Prabhupada explains in the Prabhupada that like hogs, they, even if you offer them the nicest dish, like for example nice sweetmeats like burfi, laddu, whatever, rasgulla, that they won't eat that. They are attached to simply eating